Welcome to Earlicon's training on hot work. This training must be completed by all maintenance employees or anyone else who might partake in hot work activities. In order to complete this training, you must finish this presentation and then complete the quiz at the end of the training. A score of 80% or better is required to pass. Upon completion of this training, you should be able to identify the general hazards associated with hot work activities. You should be able to explain the hot work permitting system and the procedures involved. You need to be able to explain the roles of those individuals in the hot work permitting system, including the hot work operator, permit authorizing individual, and the fire watch designee. Hot work is a familiar routine activity at most industrial facilities, but because hot work tools are highly portable sources of ignition, improperly conducted hot work is a major cause for fires and explosions, which have resulted in extensive property damage, serious personal injury, and workers' death. Hazards associated with hot work include fire hazards caused by molten metal, sparks, and hot work surfaces, which can cause fires or explosions if the proper safety procedures are not followed. Flying sparks are the main cause of fires and explosions associated with welding or cutting. Sparks can travel up to 35 feet and can travel greater distances if falling. Sparks can pass through or become lodged in cracks, clothing, pipe holes, and other small openings in floors, walls, or partitions, which can allow a fire to start. Combustible materials are anything that is combustible or flammable and is susceptible to ignition by cutting or welding. The most common materials likely to become involved in a fire are those of combustible building construction, such as the following: floors, partitions, and roofs, wood, paper, textiles, plastics, chemicals, or flammable liquids and gases, and dusts. Ground cover such as grass and brush. Welding and cutting can cause explosions in spaces containing flammable gases, vapors, liquids, or combustible dusts, in tanks and vessels that contain or have held flammable substances. There are many hazards to the hot work operator associated with conducting hot work activities, such as burns, sparks, electrical shock, optical or UV radiation, and breathing in toxic welding fumes. Engineering controls, protective equipment, and safe work practices all safeguard the welder from many physical and health hazards. Hot work can be dangerous because of the tools used are highly portable sources of ignition that can be introduced into an area where ignition sources do not usually exist. The goal of hot work safety practices is to avoid bringing sparks, flames, or heat produced by the tools into contact with a source of fuel. Next, you must understand the different categories of locations. Each location's environment will determine the category it falls into. There are three categories of hot work locations that an environment can fall under. 1. Designated area. 2. A non-designated area. And 3. A non-permissible location. A designated area is a permanent location approved for routine hot work operations, made safe by the removal of all possible sources of ignition that could be ignited by the hot work tool. An example is our welding or our maintenance shop, where all the combustibles have been removed. In this area, a hot work permit is not required when doing hot work activities. A non-designated area is one which safe conditions for hot work exist, or where safe conditions can be created by moving or protecting combustibles. An example of a controlled area is an area where welding must take place, and the work area has been made safe by removing all combustibles and implementing the requirements on the hot work permit in order to make it safe. In a controlled area, a hot work permit must be obtained by the hot work operator. The permit must be obtained from the maintenance department before the hot work can proceed in a controlled area. The permit includes a checklist of precautions, each of which must be considered and then implemented if the authorizer determines that it is applicable to the specific situation, such as ensuring fire protection equipment is available in the work area, controlling potential and existing fuel sources, and posting a fire watch when required. Non-permissible locations include areas not authorized by management, in buildings where sprinkler systems have been impaired, in the presence of an explosive atmosphere, or in the presence of unclean or improperly prepared equipment, drums, tanks, or other containers that have previously contained flammable materials that could develop an explosive atmosphere, and in areas with an accumulation of combustible dusts that could develop explosive atmospheres. Hot work is never allowed in, on, or near tanks, vessels, or containers that contain or have contained flammable substances. Next, we will look at the Hot Work Permit Program requirements. First, you need to analyze the hazards prior to the initiation of the hot work. You must perform a hazard assessment that identifies the scope of the work, any potential hazards, and the methods to control those hazards. After analyzing the hazards, see if there's any possibility of hot work alternatives. An alternative hot work method is termed cold work, such as, can the job be completed with cold work? An example of cold work is performing repairs with another method instead of using heat-producing tools. If yes, a hot work permit is not required. Can the hot work be performed in a designated area, such as a maintenance shop where the welding area is? If yes, then the hot work permit is not required. Is the proposed work to be performed in a non-permissible area? If so, the hot work permit cannot be authorized and the hot work must not be conducted. Oerlikon's Hot Work Permit Program is detailed in our SOP 62. This policy details the program requirements and includes a flowchart that is designed to help determine if a permit is required. If it is determined that a hot work permit is required, a hot work permit must be obtained from the permit authorizing individual. The maintenance department is the primary authorizer of hot work permits. The hot work permit includes a checklist of precautions, each of which must be considered and then implemented if the permit authorizing individual determines that it is applicable to the specific situation. This is an example of what a permit will look like. During hot work activities, all fire protection equipment must be fully operational. This includes fire extinguishers and sprinkler systems. Also, be sure to locate the nearest fire alarm pull station prior to hot work operations. Fuel sources within 35 feet from hot work are easily ignitable, so within this area, combustible materials must be removed or shielded. The floor must be swept clean of combustible materials. The absence of hazardous atmospheres or flammable materials must be verified. Steps must be taken to ensure that none are introduced, and adequate ventilation must be assured. Combustible floors must be covered with damp sand or fire-resistant sheets. Openings or cracks in walls, floors, or ducts through which sparks might travel and ignite combustibles in other locations must be covered. Conveyor systems must also be shut down. Fire-resistant tarps must be suspended beneath overhead work, and if hot work is done on one side of a wall, partition, ceiling, or roof, precautions shall be taken to prevent ignition of combustibles on the other side by relocating the combustibles. If relocation is impractical, combustibles shall be protected by a welding curtain such as the one depicted. This picture is of a welding curtain used to prevent sparks from traveling from one area to an adjacent work area. A fire watch must also be performed if it is impractical to relocate combustibles. The fire watch must be stationed on the opposite side of the curtain of where the work is being performed. A fire watch is needed if combustible materials are located closer than 35 feet from the hot work, if they're more than 35 feet away from the hot work but might easily be ignited by the sparks, if there are walls or floor openings within 35 feet and expose combustible materials in adjacent areas, including concealed area spaces in walls and floors, or if they are adjacent to the opposite side of the partition walls, ceilings, or roofs. The fire watch monitors the hot work area for changing condition and watches for fires and extinguishes them if possible. The fire watch shall be familiar with the facility and procedures for sounding the fire alarm and contacting the fire department in the event of an emergency. When changing conditions are observed by anyone, whether the fire watch, hot work operator, permit issuer, or any other employee, that person should immediately stop the hot work activities. In summary, the fire watch must have a fire extinguisher available and be ready and trained to use it. They must be familiar with the procedure to sound the fire alarm and how to contact the fire department in case of an emergency. The fire watch should try and extinguish fires only if it's within their capability. And lastly, they must maintain a watch for at least 30 minutes after the hot work activities have been completed. It is the responsibility of the permit issuer to supervise any hot work done by an outside contractor, and to inform the contractor of site-specific hazards, such as the presence of flammable materials. Any employee has the right to stop hot work activities if a new hazard or condition presents itself. An example of a changing condition might be the introduction of a new flammable substance into the hot work area. Hot work activities create various health and physical hazards. The goal of the hot work permit program is to prevent heat sources from coming into contact with fuel sources in order to prevent the possibility of fires and explosions that could result in injury, death, and loss of property. Hot work is allowed in two types of locations. Designated areas are a permanent location approved for routine hot work operations. A designated area has been made safe by removing all possible ignition sources. A controlled area is a location where safe conditions exist or where safe conditions can be created by moving or protecting combustibles. A hot work operator must obtain a hot work permit from the maintenance department before performing hot work in a controlled area. A fire watch must be posted when hot work is performed in a location where a fire might develop. A non-permissible location is a hazardous location such as a tank that holds flammable chemicals. No hot work is allowed in this type of work environment. It is critical that proper planning and communication be implemented by all involved in planning hot work activities in order to reduce the possibility of injury, death, and property loss. If you would like more information about hot work activities, please visit the references listed. Thank you for completing this portion of the hot work training. Be sure to complete the associated quiz. A score of 80% must be obtained in order to complete this training. Thank you.